guys, it's Senti Reads, and as you can see by the video title, today I'll be talking about Carrie by Stephen King. To be honest, I've never really understood the hype around Stephen King. I've tried to read some of his books before, and they're just kind of boring, and a little bit creepy too with the way he talks about female characters. I just really don't like his vibe.
I hate Halloween.
You hate Halloween.
But it is spooky month, and I wanted to read more horror novels, so I figured let's give Stephen King a second try to see if all of my bad thoughts about him are just misconceptions. And spoiler alert, they're not. This book was a fucking nightmare, and not in the horror sense, just that it was bad. But before I get into that, let's cover some background. Carrie is actually Stephen King's first novel, if you didn't know that. It was published in 1974 and was the first of 64 novels he would come to publish. If you've somehow never heard of Carrie, it's about a teenage girl named Carrie White who is relentlessly bullied after she gets her period in the shower after gym class. Unfortunately for her bullies, Carrie has telekinetic powers and uses them to get her bloody revenge. Carrie was originally meant to be a short story, but after King wrote the iconic shower scene, he decided he hated it and threw it in the trash, where unfortunately it did not remain, because his wife Tabitha stumbled across it and told him it was good and that she'd help him with the female perspective if he kept writing it. First of all, I want to know why Tabitha was digging around in the trash like a raccoon. And secondly, I want to know what advice she actually gave, because Stephen King writes like he's never met a woman, let alone married one. And it doesn't seem like she really actually gave that much input for Carrie based on some of the phrases and terms he uses that are wrong, but I'll get into that later. With all that background out of the way, let's jump right into Carrie. Wait, that sounds dirty. The book, not the person. You know what I mean. The novel opens up with a clip from a news article about rocks mysteriously falling from the sky on Carrie's house. And there are a lot of these weird interjections from news articles, like in-universe books that are written about Carrie, textbooks, like medical documents. There's all these random snippets. And I can't say I really enjoyed them. They really add nothing to the story. And King admits himself that he only added them to pad out the book. For the most part, I won't really cover those sections unless it's relevant or I have something funny to say. I've complained about them enough. We then jump right into the shower scene that King apparently thought was bad enough to throw into the trash. The girls had been playing volleyball in period 1, and their morning sweat was light and eager. Oh boy, we're starting off strong with the perviness. I don't really know how sweat can be light or eager or both, and I really don't want to think about that anymore. It's revealed right away in the narration that Carrie is telekinetic, so if you thought that was going to be a cool plot twist later on, you'd be wrong. We also get this lovely description of Carrie herself. Carrie stood among them stolidly, a frog among swans. She was a chunky girl with pimples on her neck and back and buttocks. Her wet hair completely without color. It rested against her face with dispirited sogginess, and she simply stood, head slightly bent, letting the water splat against her flesh and roll off. She looked the part of the sacrificial goat, the constant butt, believer in left-handed monkey wrenches, perpetual foul-up, and she was. She wished forlornly and constantly that Ewen High had individual and thus private showers, like the high schools at Westover or Lewiston. They stared, they always stared. Oof, that's pretty harsh characterization, but it's understandable considering Carrie is meant to be the outcast, so I'll give that a pass. We also get a description of the gym teacher, Miss Desjardins, as she steps in to check on the girls. Miss Desjardins, their slim, non-breasted gym teacher, stepped in, craned her neck around briefly, and slapped her hands together once, smartly. I'm going to be real with you guys, I only included this snippet because I want to shame Stephen King for his incessant need to describe the breasts of his female characters, underage or otherwise. Like, trust me, dude, we really don't need to know what every lady's breasts are doing or what they look like in every situation. Moving on, Carrie, at 16 years old, gets her first period right there in the shower with everyone watching. She's already sort of an outcast, so of course the other girls jump straight into bullying and shaming her for a natural body process. I'd like to say girls wouldn't bully other girls over a period, but let's be real, teenage girls are notoriously cruel. A tampon suddenly struck her in the chest and fell with a plop at her feet. A red flower stained the absorbent cotton and spread. The girls start pelting Carrie with tampons and pads, and I just want to know where they're getting all of them because those things are fucking expensive. She backed away, howling in the new silence, fat forearms crossing her face, a tampon stuck in the middle of her pubic hair. Okay, wait a minute. First of all, Carrie has already been described as chunky, so I really don't need the reminder of her fatness. Second of all, how thick is her bush that a tampon can stick in it? This scene is referred to again later in the book, except King says it was a sanitary napkin stuck to her bush, which makes more sense to me than a tampon. But, correct me if I'm wrong because I was not alive in the 70s when this book was written, but I thought a sanitary napkin was a pad. Does Stephen King think pads and tampons are the same thing? Did his wife not correct him? I have so many questions. Miss Desjardins comes back in and is sort of confused what all the commotion is about because she's a grown-ass woman who long since realized that periods aren't anything to be ashamed about. It was incredible, could not be. She herself had begun menstruation shortly after her 11th birthday and had gone to the head of the stairs to yell down excitedly, "Hey Mom, I'm on the rag!"
Excuse me, what?
Scratch that. Apparently, Miss Desjardins never thought periods were a big deal. As someone who also had their first period at 11 years old, sorry if that's too much info, I can confidently say I was not running around screaming about it to anyone who would listen. I was actually kind of embarrassed. "Carrie, is this your first period?" But now that the thought had been admitted, she hardly had to ask. The blood was dark and flowing with terrible heaviness. Both of Carrie's legs were smeared and splattered with it, as though she had waded through a river of blood. "It hurts," Carrie groaned. "My stomach." Let's address a few myths here. First of all, your first period is not going to be any heavier than any of the rest of your periods. If you have lighter flows, you're going to have a lighter first period, heavier flows, heavier first period. That's just kind of how it works. The second myth was one I actually believed and fact-checked while making this video. I mistakenly thought that showers and being in water, like being in the bath or whatever, slowed the rate of bleeding, but I was completely wrong. That's just not true. And I don't know why I thought that or why so many people believe that, but that's not true. Regardless, if blood is smearing and spattering down your legs, that's probably not a good sign. You really are not meant to bleed that much. Seek medical attention if you bleed through your pad or tampon within 2 hours or you're passing clots bigger than quarters. And that is all I'm going to say about periods for now. You're welcome for the information. Miss Desjardins breaks up the bullying session and tries to help Carrie the best she can, so she brings Carrie to the assistant principal, Mr. Morton, to report the incident and have Carrie sent home for the rest of the day so she can sort of relax. Mr. Morton repeated wisely. He did not understand women and had no urge at all to discuss menstruation. You know, I kind of wish Stephen King was able to admit this to himself instead of writing this damn book, but here we are. Anyway, Mr. Morton does let Carrie go home, but not before he repeatedly gets her name wrong despite being corrected every time, because we really need to know that nobody likes Carrie. Carrie leaves, and Miss Desjardins tells Mr. Morton about the incident, and he doesn't really understand what's going on, so he gives Miss Desjardins permission to decide on the punishment. We cut back to Carrie walking home from school, and her inner monologue is a lot of fanatical religious rambling, so it's really hard to read her sections of the book. We also get a little taste of how crazy her mom is when it's revealed she locks Carrie in a closet to punish her for even the simplest of transgressions. Needless to say, Carrie is not in the mood to be fucked with. Some little kid rides by on a bike and heckles her, so she flips him right on his face with her telekinetic powers. She can't control her powers super well yet, but she's gonna practice. We get a flashback to the stone incident that was mentioned at the beginning of the book when all those rocks fell on Carrie's house, and that was triggered after Carrie saw her neighbor sunbathing in a bikini and her mom was absolutely pissed about it. Of course, she chose to punish Carrie for this, as if Carrie has any control over what the neighbor decides to wear or do in her own yard. Carrie stood up for herself, which is a very rare occurrence, and when her mom was trying to punish her for this, she used her telekinetic powers to smash up the house with rocks. Oh, and we also learned through this scene that Carrie's mom refers to breasts as dirty pillows, which is maybe supposed to be scary, but really just makes me laugh and it's weirdly funny.
Calls them dirty pillows.
Back to present day, Carrie arrives home from school and we're greeted with what, to me, is the scariest part of the book. But the room was actually dominated by a huge plaster crucifix on the far wall, fully 4 feet high. Mama had mail-ordered it special from St. Louis. The Jesus impaled upon it was frozen in a grotesque, muscle-straining rictus of pain, mouth drawn in a groaning curve. His crown of thorns bled scarlet streams down temples and forehead. The eyes were turned up in a medieval expression of slanted agony. Both hands were also drenched with blood, and the feet were nailed to the small plaster platform. This corpus had also given Carrie endless nightmares in which the mutilated Christ chased her through the dream corridors, holding a mallet and nails, begging her to take up her cross and follow him.
Jesus Christ.
Excuse me? If a 4-foot-tall, incredibly detailed statue of Christ absolutely suffering on the cross sounds unrealistic for someone to own, then I've got some really unfortunate news for you. In Stephen King's writing craft book / memoir on writing, he reveals that one of the real girls he based Carrie's character on had a statue just like this one. That's a big no from me, dog. I'll pass on that. Going upstairs, Carrie decides to make herself more comfortable. She unsnapped her heavy cotton bra and let it fall. Her breasts were milk white, upright and smooth. The nipples were a light coffee color. She ran her hands over them and a little shiver went through her. Evil, bad, oh it was. Mama had told her there was something. The something was dangerous, ancient, unutterably evil. It could make you feeble. Watch, Mama said. It comes at night. It will make you think of the evil that goes on in parking lots and roadhouses. Not to be dramatic, but I Oh dear lord, I'll pass on this one too. Steven, how many times do I have to tell you I'm not interested in what the lady character's breasts are doing? I guess I'm glad to know they're up right now, because he said they were pointing downward while she was being accosted in the shower. You're lucky I didn't share that snippet. I don't know about the rest of you booby havers, but mine don't flip-flop in different directions like some kind of dirty pillow. I can't come up with a better analogy. We then cut to Sue Snell getting freaky with her boyfriend Tommy in the back of his car. Sue is one of the girls who bullied Carrie in the shower, and she's normally a goody two-shoes type character, but she got caught up in the moment and joined in with the other girls. We get some excruciatingly unnecessary exposition about her sex life with Tommy, and I really didn't want to read about it. I understand that some teenagers have sex, but I'm an adult, and I really don't want to read about that. Tommy tells Sue that what she did to Carrie was no big deal because he bullied kids before and he doesn't really feel bad about it. Then they bone again, and this time Sue has an orgasm. Good for her, I guess. Ew, I don't really care. Back to Carrie, her mom comes home from work and confronts Carrie like getting her period is some kind of moral failure on her part. Her mom spouts a bunch of religious fanaticism while beating the shit out of Carrie and tells her to get in the closet. The foot swung and connected with Carrie's rump. Her nose scraped the wood floor. They were entering the place of the altar. There was a cross on the table covered with an embroidered silk cloth. On either side of the cross there were white candles. Behind this were several paint-by-the-numbers of Jesus and his apostles. And to the right was the worst place of all, the home of terror, the cave where all hope, all resistance to God's will, and Mama's was extinguished. The closet door leered open. Inside, below a hideous blue bulb that was always lit, was Deralt's conception of Jonathan Edwards' famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. I know this is supposed to be a tense moment, but the paint-by-numbers thing really threw me off. I've been doing a lot of paint-by-numbers recently to relax after work, so thinking about Carrie's crazy-ass mom doing little Jesus paintings cracked me up. Carrie spends a terrible 6 hours in the closet before she is finally let out to work on her dress for the upcoming spring ball or prom or homecoming or whatever. I swear King calls this dance something different every time he mentions it, so I think I'm just going to try to refer to it as the prom from now on. We then get some background on why Carrie's mom, Margaret, acts the way she does. She got married to some guy named Ralph and soon thereafter was admitted to the hospital and wouldn't tell her family why. It turns out she had a miscarriage, and apparently the timing of it meant that she had sex out of wedlock, which is apparently a big deal. And enough to make Margaret's mind break. From then on, she viewed all sex, even between married couples, as evil. That's it. That's the reason. I don't want to minimize how traumatic a miscarriage can be, but this is a ridiculous character motivation. She likely has some kind of untreated mental illness, but I don't think that's ever stated in the book, and honestly, that's not a good character motivation either. Back at school, Miss Desjardins, the gym teacher, decides to give the girls who bullied Carrie a piece of her mind, but not before King reminds us again that she has tiny boobs. I can't find my screenshot for this, but he calls her like the non-breasted gym teacher or something, and it's like, we get it. She don't have titties. Move on. Well, isn't he the lucky one, Desjardins remarked. What are you going to give him for a party favor, Chris? A bloody Kotex? Or how about some used toilet paper? I understand these things seem to be your sack these days. Damn, dude, Miss Desjardins doesn't fuck around. She even slams Chris into a locker and yells at the girls about how horrible what they did to Carrie was. She wanted their punishment to be 3 days suspension and not letting them go to prom, but the school said that was too harsh, so instead they have a week of detention where they're going to be running laps in the gym. Chris refuses to take the detention, which means she can't go to prom, I guess, as her punishment, and that's apparently enough to make her the main antagonist of the book, and she's going to cause all the shit that goes down later. We get a long-ass scene of Chris's lawyer dad trying to threaten the principal into dropping the punishment, but that doesn't really ever go anywhere, so I'm not going to cover it. Cut to Sue and Tommy again at some kind of old-timey soda shop where the local teenagers hang out, and they run into Chris and her delinquent boyfriend Billy. Sue went over and slid carefully into the vacant side of Chris's booth. She was looking exceptionally pretty, her black hair held by a shamrock green band and a tight basque blouse that accentuated her firm, up-thrust breasts. "How are you, Chris?" "Bitchin' good," Chris said a little too blithely. "You heard the latest? I'm out of the prom. I bet that cocksucker Grail loses his job, though." Did people talk like this in the 70s? Surely they must have if it was written, but this caught me so off guard that I almost missed the booby description. Stephen King really wants you to know that these teenage girls don't have floppy titties. FBI, open up! The group of teenagers talk about the Carrie situation, which Chris blames entirely on Carrie like it was her fault that the rest of the girls decided to bully her. Sue tries to take the high road, which Chris has none of, reminding her that she participated just as much as the rest of them. I think we're supposed to like Sue because she feels bad for what she did, but she seems more preoccupied with how much shame she feels instead of the pain she caused Carrie, so I don't give a flying fuck about Sue Snell. We get a scene of Carrie practicing her telekinesis. It apparently raises her heart rate to dangerous levels, and her powers will destroy her body if she's not careful, so this is not something she can do often, and is sort of foreshadowing for later on. And then we cut straight back to Sue fucking Snell! If you couldn't tell, this book is all over the place. It jumps back and forth between characters seemingly at random, so that's why this is sort of a bit of a jumbled plot description. Sue has the genius idea that Tommy should take Carrie to prom, which is apparently her apology for the bullying. She could just, I don't know, say sorry, but apparently that's too simple. Tommy is obviously taken aback by this and gives us this little nugget of wisdom. You are kids, he said. Kids don't even know what they're doing. Kids don't even know their reactions really actually hurt other people. They have no, empathy. Dig? Apparently the parts of our brain responsible for empathy don't finish developing until our early 20s, so I guess he's technically right, but goddamn, I think it's pretty obvious that throwing tampons at someone who's clearly in distress is a shitty thing to do, and a 16-year-old would know better. Regardless, Tommy agrees to ask Carrie to prom, and we get to see a description of her from his point of view. She looked up from her books with a startled wince, as if expecting a blow. The day was overcast, and the bank of fluorescence embedded in the ceiling was not particularly kind to her pale complexion. But he saw for the first time, because it was the first time he had really looked, that she was far from repulsive. Her face was round rather than oval, and the eyes were so dark that they seemed to cast shadows beneath them, like bruises. Her hair was darkish blonde, slightly wiry, pulled back in a bun that was not becoming to her. The lips were full, almost lush, the teeth naturally white. Her body, for the most part, was indeterminate. A baggy sweater concealed her breasts except for token nubs. The skirt was colorful, but awful all the same. It fell to a 1958 mid-shin hem in an odd and clumsy A-line. The calves were strong and rounded. The attempt to conceal these with heathery knee socks was bizarre but unsuccessful, and handsome. Well, it's good to know that Carrie isn't a total beast. In fact, she even has handsome calves. Did we really need to hear about her boobs again, though, considering you can't even see them in this fucking sweater she's wearing? Carrie obviously assumes that Tommy asking her out is some kind of cruel joke, but eventually says that she'll go with him to prom. Despite already having made a dress earlier in the novel, I guess Carrie needs to make another one, so I don't know if that was not a prom dress or what the fuck she was doing there. But for this new dress, she picks velvet, which is apparently a risque fabric choice, and she's worried her mom won't approve of it. Carrie is hit with memories of her mom's abuse, including the rock incident, and it's revealed that the incident was more severe than originally presented because Carrie used her telekinetic powers to smash up the house because her mom was coming at her with a knife with the intention to kill her. It's clear Margaret knows about Carrie's telekinesis, which is part of the reason she treats her so poorly, because she believes Carrie is evil or possessed or something of the sort. Carrie tells her mom about Tommy asking her to prom, which obviously goes poorly. Margaret throws her tea in her daughter's face and yells at her to go into the closet. Carrie is understandably over all the bullshit and uses her powers to keep her mom from hitting her anymore, like she pauses her hand midair, like with her telekinetic powers. And then Carrie tells her that things are going to change and her mom can't keep hitting her like this, which, good for Carrie. But right as I really start to root for Carrie, we cut to some boring and inconsequential scenes that I won't talk about, and then back to Sue fucking Snell decorating the gym for prom. I don't want to hear about Sue Snell anymore. The book is called Carrie. Tell me about Carrie. Anyway, the theme for prom is springtime in Venice. Sue reveals she's not even going to prom, and it's not really clear if it's because of her shame or the punishment or what. I thought the detention was the punishment, and Chris only couldn't go to prom because she refused to do the detention, but Sue followed through with the punishment, so I thought she'd be allowed to go to prom. Whatever, I'm putting too much brain power into this. And of course Chris shows up to talk to the prom committee. She was wearing wine-colored velvet hot pants and a silky white blouse. No bra from the way things were jiggling up front. A dirty old man's dream, Sue thought sourly. And then wondered what Chris could want and where the prom committee had set up shop. Can we fucking stop already? I know y'all are probably so tired of hearing me bitch about the booby thing, but I had to suffer through it, so you do too. I really want to hammer home that people aren't exaggerating when they talk about how often King unnecessarily describes the breasts of his female characters and just is a pervert in general, so I'm going to talk about it every time it happens. It's clear now that Chris has some kind of plan in motion to ruin prom, and if you know anything about Carrie, I'm sure you already know what's going to happen. We get a scene of Chris's boyfriend Billy and his loser friends rocking up to a pig farm in the middle of the night to collect some blood for their plan. Personally, I think smashing a pig's head in with a hammer and then slitting its throat is a little far for a prank, but what the hell do I know? We then immediately fast forward straight to prom night. She put the dress on for the first time on the morning of May 27th in her room. She had brought a special brassiere to go up with it, which gave her breasts the proper uplift. Not that they actually needed it, but left their top halves uncovered. Wearing it gave her a weird, dreamy feeling that was half shame and half defiant excitement.
No, God! No, God,
please, no! No!
God fucking damn it, I get it, Steven. Teenagers have perky boobs. You don't have to keep mentioning them. Carrie's mom walks in and says she can see Carrie's dirty pillows, to which Carrie corrects her and says they're breasts and every woman has them. Her mom begs her to burn the dress and stay home, but Carrie doesn't want to hear any of that shit. She uses her powers to drag her mom down the hall and shut her out of the house. And not able to get back in the house, she just leaves, and I don't know if she goes to work or where the fuck she goes, but Carrie sits around and waits for Tommy to come pick her up, and she's understandably worried that he is not going to show, but eventually he does, and they head out to the dance. We then cut to Chris and Billy hiding out somewhere. We get some more awful exposition about teenagers boning as Chris thinks about all the guys she slept with before Billy, because that's apparently relevant to the plot. She says she met Billy at a party after a drug bust, which is of course super romantic. She kind of likes that he's the bad boy type, but I'd argue that someone who slits animals' throats is more than just a bad boy. They get down to boning and Chris, I'm sorry, that's the weirdest thing I've ever said. They get down to boning and Chris says that maybe the whole Carrie thing is a bad idea and they shouldn't go through with their plan, but Billy immediately shoots that down because he's a bad boy. We then cut back to Tommy and Carrie at prom, and they're having a great time, and everyone thinks Carrie looks super pretty, and they're impressed with the fact that she made her own dress. I don't know if people are just being nice to her because she's with Tommy or what, but the shift in how everyone treats her is a little odd. Too bad Carrie's good time is ruined by a random and overly long flashback scene of Billy setting up buckets of pig blood from the gym rafters right above the homecoming king and queen seats. Oh yeah, that's the plan if you somehow didn't know that already. They're going to rig it so Carrie wins prom queen, and then they're going to dump the blood on her. It's just a prank, bro.
I'm joking! Stop! 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 Stop the break! Stop! Stop!
I guess Stephen King didn't think that we'd believe this was realistic because he goes into excruciating detail about how Billy sets up these buckets with like a whole ass pulley system. It goes on for pages and pages and pages before we finally cut back to the prom. Carrie's still having a great time and she's not quite brave enough to dance yet, but she's enjoying listening to the band with Tommy. I sort of wish that Billy scene didn't happen so we could see the plan as it unfolds. It sort of kills the tension to know exactly what's going to happen to her. The story of Carrie is pretty widely known, so I already knew what was going to happen at prom before I read the book, but it sucks that the novel spoils itself. There's a general rule in fiction that if a character has a plan, the author only describes the plan to the reader if it's going to fail. Otherwise, the plan is kept vague until it happens, and then the reader gets to see how it unfolds. If you tell the reader what's going to happen, and then it happens according to the plan, that's just sort of boring. Moving on, we get one of those random exposition snippets that I've widely been neglecting to talk about. It's from a book written about what happened at prom night, and the author goes into Carrie's past. Apparently her telekinesis is genetic, and her grandma also had powers. Carrie's mom, Margaret, didn't get the powers, so they must skip a generation, but Margaret saw firsthand what her own mother could do, which is probably why she's so scared of Carrie, and she gets a butcher knife and waits in the living room for Carrie to come home from the dance. Back at prom, Carrie's still having a great time. She talks with Miss Desjardins, who awkwardly brings up the shower incident, because that's exactly what Carrie wants to think about right now, before she goes back to hang out with Tommy. We cut away from the prom for the 100th time to get a scene of Sue fucking Snell sitting at home by herself. It's revealed that her period is a week late before we cut to a scene with Billy and Chris. All of this jumping around is giving me whiplash, but that's how the book is written, so that's how I'm covering it. Billy and Chris talk about their plan for the prank. They're going to pull the rope to drop the blood buckets when the school song plays, and then they're going to run to the car to escape. Billy tells Chris that if she doesn't make it to the car in time, he'll leave her behind, and then threatens to kill her if she tells anyone that they were the ones who did all this. What a charmer. Back to prom, it's time to vote for the king and queen. It's weird that they're voting at the dance instead of the winners being decided beforehand, but maybe things were done differently in the 70s. I don't know, I wasn't alive back then. There's a tie between Carrie and Tommy and some other couple, so they have to vote again. But before we can get to all that, we cut back to Chris and Billy. I think all the cuts to different scenes are supposed to build tension, but it's more irritating than anything else to have this constant back and forth. Nothing even happens with those two in that scene before we cut back to prom again. Carrie begs Tommy not to vote for them because she has a sort of premonition that something's going to go wrong if they're voted king and queen. She thinks about her mother, so naturally we have to cut away from the prom again to have another unnecessary scene. Carrie's mother is sharpening her butcher knife and she accidentally cuts herself in the process. If she's that clumsy, then I don't know how she thinks she's going to kill her telekinetic daughter. But I guess we'll get to that when we get to that. Cut back to prom yet again, and it's announced that Carrie and Tommy won by 1 vote. It doesn't look like Chris did a really good job of rigging the election if it was that close, so I'm not sure what the backup plan was going to be if Carrie didn't win. Carrie and Tommy walk up to sit on their thrones, but before the blood drops, we cut away yet again to get a pointless scene from Chris and Billy waiting to pull the string. "Shut up," she whispered. She was trembling, and he thought her body had never looked so lush or exciting. When this was over, he was going to have her until every other time she'd been had was like 2 pumps with an F slur's little finger. He was going on her like a raw cob through butter.
Excuse me, what?
If you've ever wondered why King gets accused of being homophobic, well, here you go. He'll justify it by saying it's from Billy's perspective or whatever, so I'll let you decide for yourself if this offends you. What offends me most is this awful corn analogy. Like, what the fuck? Anyway, eventually they decide it's time and they pull the string, which lets the buckets of blood flow loose. Instead of cutting to the prom to see the aftermath, we cut to Sue fucking Snell, who looks outside and sees that the school is on fire. The timeline gets sort of wonky here as we cut around to random scenes that are out of chronological order, and it goes from character to character, and the timeline's all over the place. I'll do my best to explain the ending, but I want you to know I was very confused the first time I read it. Oh, but before that, let's also talk about why Stephen King gets accused of being a racist. When I was a little girl, I had a Walt Disney storybook called Song of the South, and it had that Uncle Remus story about the tar baby in it. There was a picture of the tar baby sitting in the middle of the road, looking like one of those old-time Negro minstrels with the black face and great big white eyes. When Carrie opened her eyes, it was like that. They were the only part of her that wasn't completely covered in blood. This is from one of the random book snippets shoved in to make the novel longer, and it's from a biography of a girl who was at the prom that night. Why we needed to derail the finale with whatever the fuck this is totally beyond me. As readers, we don't even know the girl whose biography this is from, so we have no prior context of this character being a racist. It just feels like it came out of nowhere, and it just rubs me the wrong way. Rant over, let's get through this fucking ending. The buckets fall and Carrie is drenched in blood. Tommy is hit in the head with one of the buckets that is still partially full of blood, so it knocks him out. People start laughing, which understandably upsets Carrie, and I don't think I would laugh if something like this happened because it's nasty and scary. Carrie stumbles away and falls to her knees, only to be kicked in the ass by one of her classmates. At this point, Carrie is fully over everyone's bullshit and she goes full scorched earth. Using her powers, she locks everyone in the gym and sets the sprinklers off with the intention of showering them like the shower scene from the beginning of the book, but instead, the water shorts out the band's electrical equipment and starts a fire. Carrie rolls with this and destroys all the nearby fire hydrants, so it'll be harder for the fire to be put out. For good measure, she also blows up some gas stations and cuts the phone lines. I knew shit was going to go down at prom, but before I read the book, I didn't realize Carrie would essentially destroy the whole town. And once she's finished with that, she makes it home for a confrontation with her mother. "I should have killed myself when he put it in me," she said clearly. "After the first time, before we were married, he promised. Never again. He said we just slipped. I believed him. I fell down and I lost the baby, and that was God's judgment. I thought that the sin had been expiated by blood, but sin never dies. Sin never dies." Her eyes glittered. "It wasn't until he came in that I smelled the whiskey on his breath. And he took me, with the stink of filthy roadhouse whiskey still on him, he took me, and I liked it." She screamed out the last words at the ceiling. "I liked it. Oh, all that dirty fucking and his hands on me, all over me. Mama, mama." Okay, let's try to dig into this. The first passage I shared sort of implies that Margaret sleeping with Carrie's father was not consensual, but in the second passage, she says she liked it. I don't really know what to think about all of that. Margaret's character isn't well developed, as I said before, so I don't really understand her motivations still and all of the choices she's made. Margaret stabs Carrie in the shoulder, which obviously isn't a fatal blow, so Carrie is able to use her telekinetic powers to stop her mom's heart, which is actually pretty badass. Carrie then wanders back out into the street and comes across Billy and Chris, but not before we get a gross scene from their perspective where Billy tries to rape Chris. "We got it on, Charlie. We really got it on." He called her Charlie whenever he was pleased with her. It seemed to be, she thought with a cold blink of humor, a generic term for good cunt. "Call your daddy?" He was grunting. "That what you gonna do? Huh? Huh? That it, old Chucky? Call big ol' legal beagle daddy? Huh, I would've done it to you, you know that? I would've dumped it all over your fucking squash. You know it? Huh? Know it? Pig blood for pigs, right? Right on your motherfucking squash, you..." She had suddenly ceased to resist. He paused, staring down at her, and she had an odd smile on her face. "You wanted it this way all along, didn't you, you miserable little scumbag? That's right, isn't it? You creepy little one-nut, low-cock, dinkless wonder." Okay. I don't even really know where to begin with all of this. Why is Charlie the nickname he came up with, and what the fuck is he referring to by squash? What does he mean? I was so taken aback by this passage that I had to include it. It's so weird and out of left field, and the things they say are kind of funny when I don't think they're supposed to be. It really ruins what is already an incredibly jumbled up and confusing ending. Oh, and also Stephen King is racist again. "Would you take me with you?" she asked. She looked at him from the floor, her lip puffed to negroid size, her eyes pleading.
Excuse me, what?
Negroid size? Really? Was that at all a necessary way to describe that she had a busted lip? Anyway, Billy tries to run over Carrie with his car, so she kills him and Chris too before wandering off again, only to run into Sue fucking Snell. She shows up to tell Carrie that she was in no way involved with the prank at the prom, and she was genuinely hoping that Carrie would have a good time with Tommy that night. Carrie forgives her for everything that happened in the past and then promptly dies. Then Sue gets her period, which I guess is symbolic. Anyway, that's pretty much how the book ends. Some more stuff happens with an investigation into what happened called like the White Convention or something like that. White Conference, I don't remember. But it's boring and it doesn't really matter, so I'm not going to cover it here. I have a lot of thoughts about Carrie, none of which are good. The narrative structure is weird and sort of all over the place. The characters are flat and uninteresting. The prose is boring at best and incredibly unpleasant at times with random pervy interludes and racist remarks. But worst of all, the book simply isn't scary. The parts that get closest to being scary are Carrie's interactions with her mother, and I think a novel centered around that instead of being bullied at school would have been much better. For the most part, there aren't even really scenes at the school, so the bullying kind of does not carry through the rest of the novel and feels like a very weak, like, central theme, if you could even call it that. I wish that the book had been focused on Carrie and her mother, so we could have got more backstory about why her mother is the way she is and get a stronger character motivation for her. However, I don't think Stephen King really understands women at all, so I don't know how successful he would be if he went down that route. And he especially doesn't understand teenagers, which is why this bullying plot that he has in this book doesn't work for me. Overall, I can't say that I recommend Carrie. I haven't watched the movies, but I'm sure they must be better than whatever the fuck this was. It was truly an unpleasant reading experience, and I can't overstate that enough. But I think that's enough of my ranting for now. I'll see you in the next video. Bye, guys.